Hello, everyone. I'm Randall Mendenhall alongside Joe Bricko, commercial and home range sales representative at Range Systems. Joe works with many of our commercial and home range customers and brings years of construction experience to the table. Joe's topic today is, how do I build a home indoor shooting range? Joe, thank you for joining today.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining in. This is an exciting topic for me because it is our fastest growing segment and because of my background. So prior to joining the team here at Range Systems, I was a general contractor, and a big part of our business was building custom homes. So it's kind of right in line with what I've done. So obviously I have a passion for this. So first slide we have here is where will you put your new range. So the first thing that we're going to want to identify is the space. So the way our process works here is we will design a equipment package into a space that you define. So a few areas that we've or a few type of buildings that we've put home ranges in, pole barns, storage buildings. I actually have a home range in a pole barn. We get a lot of use out of that, a lot of enjoyment. Under garages is really common, basements, and then bunkers or safe rooms or secondary buildings.
All right, Joe, so when you're building new, what are some of your next steps, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, so when somebody approaches me and they're thinking about building a new home or a shop or a pole barn, and it hasn't been constructed yet, and they're still in the design phase, the biggest thing we're going to want to do right away is get connected with the architect. Here, it's very important that the space is designed in a way to accept our range equipment package. So the big thing is making sure that we get that into the plan right away. So within this, the things that we're going to help the architect specify is going to be the ceiling heights and the ceiling type. So two different ceiling types. You can have a concrete lid, which I favor. I think that's the most ideal way to create it. Or you can have your typical wood truss like you'd see in a normal home construction, which we also have a solution for creating a range within, and we'll talk more about that as we move on. And then I'll help the architect define the wall structure. So really we're building our range package within a box, and there's a couple different types of ways to create that box. And then we're looking at the overall length and width. One of the most common things that's overlooked is the requirement for ventilation and the amount of setback you need for that, and then also the depth of the bullet trap. So you're really adding up three things to get your distance within that space. You're looking at the setback from the line of fire. Typically in a home range, that's going to range anywhere from 3.5 feet would really be the narrowest I'd recommend to the firing line, all the way out to 10 feet even. So you have that distance, and then you have your desired target distance, which really can be anything. It can be anywhere from 20 feet to 75 feet, and I've seen even in a home range. So just depends on how much room you have there. And then plus the depth of the bullet trap. We recommended a encapsulated block trap because it gives you a rifle rating with only taking up 2 feet of space. And with that kind of trap, rounds are entirely encapsulated, so you're almost entirely eliminating lead dust.
Excellent. So we just walked through building new. What if we decided to build into existing and do something a little bit more simplistic? What would that look like here, Joe?
Yep, and this comes up at times. People have an existing space and they say, hey, I've been in the home for 10 years and now I want to put a range into it. And most commonly people say, is this possible? We do have solutions for that. You can absolutely do that. I did one here locally that this was the case. Typically with this, You don't have the luxury of designing ahead of time, so we're not going into a situation where you have a complete concrete box. So our typical approach here is to use one of the foundation walls, and then with that, normally we'll advise that area is actually stick frame, so your regular 2x4 construction. And then what we'll do is we'll line the walls with sheets of AR steel to create that box. Now, in an ideal situation, we would want to come into a space that has 4 concrete walls, and ideally a concrete ceiling. Now, the benefit of a concrete box is the sound reduction, and then you're in a complete ballistic space. I mean, you can have an errant round come from any direction or a misfire, and you're going to be contained within that box. So a concrete box would be ideal, and typically we would find that with a new build when we work with the architect and specify that space. And again, that's because of the sound reduction and the safety of that. Now, when we get into these existing spaces, you don't have that luxury of having a concrete box that's 75 feet long, 8 feet wide, that's just perfectly set up for a range. But that's okay. We do have solutions to work around that. And again, what we would do is line the walls with steel, so you do have ballistic sidewalls, use one of the foundation walls, and then we'd use one of our baffle systems to hang from the ceiling. So absent concrete being in place on the ceiling, we would create a ballistic ceiling with our suspended baffle or with a bridging baffle. So it is very possible, and it can be done.
All right, so a big part of building, of course, is making sure that you're squared away with wherever you're building. What can you tell us about the permitting and all of the kind of the ins and outs about that process?
Yeah, and what we're finding with this is it's never a cut and dry process.
Sure.
Every city is a little bit different, and in my experience, it's pretty rare that a city has a process in place for addressing home ranges. So it's we always recommend that you do your due diligence, figure out what kind of ordinances are in place, talk to your city, see if they have a process, see what their approvals are.
Well, next, it's all about determining needs and budget. You had mentioned this earlier in the presentation, Joe. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so as far as needs and budget, again, what I would touch on as far as needs, it's risk management. A lot of times I'll have people say, all I want's a bullet trap. And that's okay. People just need to understand the potential risks there. If you miss the bullet trap and you don't have ballistic walls, I mean, you run the risk of a round escaping from that room. So again, these ranges can vary from just a bullet trap to a full-blown range equipment package like we showed you earlier, which would provide you a no escape scenario. So that's, that would touch on the needs, and obviously the needs are tied to the budget. As you start adding more equipment pieces, you're adding costs. So really it's a balance of what level of risk and safety you're comfortable with.
All right, another big component in every indoor range is ventilation. What can you tell us about that, Joe?
The big thing with this, and one of the common mistakes that I hear and people make with home ranges, is thinking they can just blow air behind the shooter, putting a fan. That's actually probably the worst case scenario. You'd be better off without any ventilation. Putting a fan behind the shooter is really just going to create a bunch of turbulence and really just drive the bad air into the respiratory system. So you really want to think about pulling air downrange.
Well, let's take a look at another aspect, and that's cost. I know you mentioned earlier this was highly dependent on your use and your equipment selection, and then also your space here. What can you tell us about cost there?
Yeah, again, it's going to range depending on your equipment selections, the size of the space, linear footage, square footage, like we talked earlier. I mean, everything from a simple bullet trap on up to, what you see in the picture here, which would be a similar package that you'd find in in a commercial range. So I would say I find that I can sell a really basic bullet trap. You might be at 10 grand. Some higher end home ranges that I've done that are like this in the picture can exceed $100,000. So, but again, it is dependent on the length and the width, square footages. I'd say the average home range is going to fall around the $65,000 mark. Seems to be the most common.
As far as key takeaways go, Joe, what can you tell our audience to sum up here as key takeaways?
Yeah, in the case of a new build, as discussed earlier, you're going to want to connect your range provider with your architect to make sure that you're designing that space to work with the equipment package, and make sure you're getting the proper ceiling heights, the proper length, the proper width, so you can get the package you want. And then determining the new versus existing. We have solutions to work in both. So that's one of the main questions we're going to find out. Do your due diligence, check with the city, see if they do have a process in place. If they don't have a process, work through that, give them the information so that they feel comfortable with what you're doing. And then ventilation, we spoke on that a little bit. You can either use your ventilation resource in a new home situation, a new build, usually the contractor that's doing the ventilation for the home. You can work with them and create a system. If not, we do have some resources for that, and I would be happy to get you in touch with them. And then we talked about the maintenance. With that, you want to have the lead cleaning product. You want to have an understanding of how to rotate the blocks within the bullet trap, and that would be the key takeaways.
On behalf of Joe and I, have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.